right, and we're live. Welcome to Weekly Wise today. To give you a little bit about, first to start out with an introduction about who we are and what we do. Here at Weekly Wise, we got started with this, oh goodness, it was last year in about April or May or so. And it came about actually because of one question. What do we do with all this ice cream? See, what happened was that we, as a family, well, I guess it stems from me, but it's definitely a family effort. I have a particular love for ice cream, and especially Ben & Jerry's. Just, it's the most delicious. Despite what Bonnie may tell you, my wife, Ben & Jerry's is the best. And each year they have what's called Ben & Jerry's Free Cone Day. And I loved to take out a day off work, drive up to Salt Lake, which was the nearest scoop shop. We'd go as a family, we'd get in line, we'd have like 13 scoops of ice cream each, have a grand old time, feel sick to our stomachs with smiles on our faces, and then come home. And it was a wonderful time. But then that franchise, it's probably about 3-4 years ago now, closed for whatever reason, I don't know. And so I told Bonnie, well, I looked it up and it said it's either Boise or Vegas. Which one do we go to for Free Cone Day? Those are the nearest scoop shops. And she didn't love the idea of taking the road trip. I mean, she's all about that, but she's just like, I don't really want to go all the way just for that. It'd be cheaper to buy her own ice cream. And she said, would it be noble enough if we bought the ice cream ourselves and like gave it out to people? And I said, noble enough? That sounds awesome. That was great. So we did. That was 3.5 years ago now. And we bought 100 pints of Ben & Jerry's. We had 300 people come and had a great time. Well, the next year, we decided to do it again. And we had 400 people come. And this last year, on Facebook, there were 2,500 people saying they were going to come. And we were like, oh boy, because before 150 people said they were coming in, 400 showed up. So we planned for 5,000 people to come. Well, usually a mom brings her kids, and it's, that's why the ratio. But this got into the college student demographic, we realized afterwards. And they're, frankly, no offense to any college students, but can be a little more flaky on things like this. And they're not bringing a bunch of kids. And we had some fun weather to deal with, too. It was windy and even snowed by the end. So we only had a little over 1,200 people show up, giving out free ice cream right here in our front yard, had a blast, and ended up with 3 chest freezers filled to the brim of Ben & Jerry's leftovers. And what fun. So we decided, okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to, we want to give this ice cream out, but we want to do something meaningful along with it. We'd love to integrate our business if we can. How can we pull this off? And we came up with Weekly Wise. If you've heard of TED Talks, this is kind of like that. We want to give people a stage to share their why, what's inside them, what motivates them, what drives them. And I'm so excited that today we have the opportunity to hear from our own Sherri LeBaron. And Sherri, I've known for a while, and in fact, a fun little story, our first Free Cone Day, that was when I first met her husband. He came and come on in, welcome. And there he is now. I was speaking of the devil. I was just talking about you, Dan.
I could hear you.
Dan came, and I got to know him because he went through the line a bunch of times, and we became friends right there on that first Ben & Jerry's Free Cone Day that I hosted. So it was great. And sorry, it just threw me off because I was not talking about that, but that's okay. So Sherri, and from Dan I got to know Sherri and through Strongbrook, and one thing about Sherri that I've noticed is she's just always upbeat. She's smiling, she's always there with a greeting. She's like, hi, how are you, Matt? How are you, Bonnie? Just cheerful, and I really appreciate that about her. So I'm excited to hear from her a topic that I love, and so I'm excited to hear what she has to share about story. Welcome up, Sherri LeBaron.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matt. I am so excited to be here, and basically what this does is it gives me an opportunity to try out some new material on you guys, because what I'm doing is doing something that I've done for a lot of years in my life, but I'm actually packaging it and creating a business with it instead of just doing what I do. And that business is Revision U, And my website's coming soon. I am so excited about that. And I've just started barely putting up a Facebook page. I haven't populated it yet, but just really excited to take off. And so this is one of my favorite topics, and it's the influence of story. So who here, and online, by raise of hand, who here has ever listened to a story? Hey, all right. Read a story? Yeah. Told a story? Yeah, okay. Written a story? Okay. So who has a favorite story from childhood? Can you name a story? One of your favorite stories growing up? Oh, no! How about you, Andrea?
I liked Little Red Riding Hood.
Okay.
What else did I like?
How about you, Amy?
Like so many.
I like Charlie Brown.
Charlie Bone. I've never heard of that one. I better go investigate.
She's reading those books right now. I have got so much more into reading now than I was when I was a kid, actually. And I loved the Happy Hollisters when I was a kid. That series was one of my favorites.
All right. How about you, Dan?
Oh, Danger in Deep Space, Tom Corbett.
Wow.
Okay, so most of us, if given enough time, have some favorite stories, either from childhood, young adulthood. Here's the thing about story. Stories and storytelling have been a very, very important part of every culture that you can think of across the globe.
Like Greek mythology.
And, right, like Greek mythology, good. But, or Norse mythology, or any kind of mythology. And from the earliest histories of any culture, storytelling has been part of that culture and stories. And even though cultures are different, like the Greeks and the Romans were different from the Norse or from the American Indians, there's a lot of similarities when it relates to story and storytelling across those cultures. Every single culture, when you go back in their history, every single culture started with oral storytelling. Every single one. And the storytelling methods that were used were very, very, very similar. First of all, the oral tradition obviously is because in the earliest times there was not a written language. So everything was passed through oral tradition. Once writing was invented, there was only a very small group of people who were able to read or write, usually the rulers and their scribes. We had the Dark Ages because of that, because only the people in the church, the upper echelon of the church, could actually read the Latin and stuff, and so the normal common people didn't have the ability to read and write. Even once language was developed in a written form, there was a big gap between the time writing was developed and the time an easy way to record that writing, like paper, was developed and available. I mean, it just really wasn't attractive to think about writing on stones or plates of brass or whatever. So all of those similarities go across any culture. Okay, so we've got the oral tradition. Also, the position of the storyteller in every culture. A storyteller was given a position of respect and admiration. They were often regarded almost as spiritual guides or healers. So in society, storytellers were in an elevated position. So the question is, why was storytelling such an important part of the culture? So much so that the storytellers were often considered beings with special powers. Why were stories so important? What was the purpose of the stories? Any ideas?
Probably to keep the traditions that they valued and the values they held.
Okay, so traditions.
Or maybe religious purposes too.
Okay, traditions or values. So principles kind of theme. I'm
Beautiful.
too. What else did you say, Matt?
Religious ideas.
Religious
Goes in there.
ideas. So okay. Anything else? Any other?
To create another life, like something that seemed appealing to them.
So entertainment purposes?
I guess, or even like a life that they wanted but didn't know how to create.
Okay.
So like dreams, like their vision or their dream, like
Kind of like a vision, yeah.
sharing their
Possibly.
dreams.
Okay,
Yeah.
possibly. If there was no written record, how was your record passed along?
Word of mouth.
Genealogy would have to be done by stories.
Excellent. So the history of the people or the place, genealogy, the family line. Okay, you guys have known little toddlers, right? Besides mine and no, what's their favorite word?
Ball is our favorite word.
And it's also a favorite word of teenagers, only they may not really want to know the answer. Why?
Why?
Oh, why?
Why? And so
Yeah.
stories were often an explanation. So they explain why and or how. And so like the why. Why does the sun always rise in the east? Well, the Greeks said Apollo got up and harnessed up his flaming chariot and his horses that only he could and drove the sun across the sky every day. And that's why it sets in the west. Another reason would be to explain how something came to be. Again, the Greek mythology, a gal named Arachne was a really, really, really talented girl who could weave really well. And so Arachne could weave, but she was also very arrogant, and she thought she was the best. And so she challenged the goddess Athena to a weaving match. The goddess Athena was the goddess of domestic arts. And so as these two were weaving the tapestry, they were both beautiful and excellent. And Athena got done a little early, and she looked at Arachne's tapestry, and Arachne's tapestry was a story of all the bad things that the gods and goddesses had done, and it made Athena really angry. And guess what she did to Arachne?
Spider.
She turned her into a spider. And so when your 2-year-old little Greek toddler says, "Where did spiders come from?" There's the explanation. So there's a lot of reason for stories in our cultures, in all cultures. Besides storytellers being in an elevated position, and besides the reasons for storytellers, storytellers also across all cultures had basic tools that aided their audience to connect deeply to the story itself and also to remember. And like Dan pointed out, one part of that was important because that was the only way that they had of memorizing or knowing their genealogy. Stories in the oral tradition were often in poetic form. One of the tools that they used was repetition. Repetition was a big key. So there were a lot of patterns of 3. There were patterned lists of people or places, and that would tie in with your genealogy. There were formulaic phrases that were all woven together. So there was like the storytellers had an actual bag of phrases that they would just kind of pick out and plug together. And some scholars estimate that up to 90% of epic poems like the Iliad and the Odyssey were recited in, those poems that were recited were made of these formulaic phrases, almost 90% of the poem. And we credit Homer with the Iliad and the Odyssey, but honestly, those were stories that were told by traveling storytellers. And each time it was told, it was a little bit different. But they used enough of those formulaic phrases over and over. And that's how the audience remembered the story, because there are certain phrases that we know, and it came to pass. Those are formulaic phrases, and they would just have a string of those. The good part about that is it became memory tools, not just for the storyteller, but also for the listener. And because of the familiarity, it connected the storyteller and the listener. It connected both of them with the story itself. And that was a big, important part of storytellers, because they knit people and histories and communities together. Going forward with the whole idea of predictability in a story, Aristotle was really well known for, in his book, his essay Poetics, he wrote down the 7 golden rules of storytelling, essentially, and he divided out the elements, what you have in a story. And everybody thinks Aristotle's great, and he was really smart and everything, but honestly, storytellers from the earliest ages were using these patterns, these elements of the story. And his elements were specifically referring to Greek drama, but you had plot, you had character, you had theme. I would write all these down, it would take a long time. You had diction, music, decor, and spectacle. And that goes way back to the very beginnings of oral storytelling. Those are the tools that the storyteller used and the audience expected. And that helped them to build this dialogue. Because the storytelling was a dialogue and it was an interaction. And we talk about telling stories as an interaction that, hi Carl.
Hello.
As an interaction that creates a living art. So they talk about stories as a living thing. Storytellers powerfully wielded their craft to knit communities together in generations through story, like I said before. It has been said, and there are just a couple quotes in here that I want to read to you. It is the contact between the storyteller and the story listeners that makes a story come to life. I want you to think about that, comes to life. According to Joseph Brujac, the presence of teller and audience and the immediacy of the moment are not fully captured by any form of technology. So the relationship with the storyteller and with the listeners and with the story itself is much more powerful in person than even you can get with technology. Unlike the insect frozen in amber, a told story is alive. It always changes from one telling to the next depending on the voice and mood of the storyteller, the place of its telling, the response of the audience. The story breathes with the teller's breath. Kind of cool thought. The story breathes with the teller's breath. So let's recap real quick. All cultures have a rich tradition in oral storytelling. Storytellers in all cultures are revered, somewhat iconic figures, perhaps even regarded as having supernatural powers like the shaman or something like that. All storytellers use recognizable tools, and there's a purpose in telling story. It can record the history of a place or a people. It can explain the why or how of something. It can be teaching moral standards or principles valued by the society, things that they want to carry on with who they are, and it can be simply to entertain. We can consider stories to be living, breathing entities that draw both teller and hearer into a relationship, and the elements of the story are recognizable. Even in films today, think about kids automatically know in a film who the villain is, who the victim is, who the hero is, and honestly, as far as the elements of a story, technology goes way beyond anything Aristotle could have imagined. And we know those things intuitively, essentially. So that's all the fact, okay? We've spent 15 minutes on the fact about stories. So what? Storytelling in and of itself is neither good nor bad, just like everything in life. It just is, okay? Storytelling is a deeply, deeply ingrained part of our history. It's a deeply ingrained part of our culture, but it's also deeply ingrained in each one of our individual lives. Think about what we know instinctively about story. We know the formulaic catchphrases. If I say, and I bet both Amy and Noelle can answer this, if I say, once upon what? A time. Or if I say, and they lived, there you got it. Okay? So we still use formulaic catchphrases. We have instinctive reactions, like if you're watching a movie and the music is playing, the beat speeds up. We know something's going to happen. Okay? If the instrumentation gets heavier and the key changes to a minor key, what do we know? Sad, or something impending doom or something like that, okay? If there's a change in lighting from dark to light or from light to dark, what do we know?
There's a change in mood.
There's a change in mood. There's something's going to happen. Either something got better or something really bad's coming up. Do you have to instruct your kids on that, Matt?
No.
They just know,
Yeah.
right? If there's a scary part of the movie coming up, they're like right there because it's gotten darker and the music has changed and they're just like, oh no. Kids also recognize those same kind of elements in reading, and they easily repeat things. The repetition with threes, and he huffed, and he
Huffed.
and he blew the house down. How many times in that story does that do that? They do it 3 different times, okay? So there you've got your pattern. Okay, so not only do we easily and instinctively recognize story and the tools used by storytellers, we also instinctively ourselves become the storytellers, creating our own living stories with a purpose or a design to draw our audience in, okay? It's so ingrained in our culture and who we are. Okay, so I want you all to close your eyes just real quick. I want you to think about some time where you broke the rules. And for those of you old enough, like in high school or junior high, okay? Do you have, raise your hand if you've got a memory, okay? Now, I want you to think about the story that you told your parents about what happened. Okay? And now, think about the same thing, same incident, was the story you told your friends any different? Okay? All right. You can open your eyes now. Were they different?
Oh yeah.
Yep.
Different stories,
Oh,
different
yeah.
audiences, different purposes?
Sure you want to admit that here, Andrew?
Okay.
I'm sure she knows the real story now.
All right. So if you're thinking about a time when you were little, or with your little kids, think about a time when maybe you broke something or you did something wrong and you got caught. What was your first instinct?
It's the dog's fault.
He ate my homework, right?
Somehow to not be in the bad.
Right. So your immediate reaction was to protect yourself, right? Can you remember the story that you told when that happened, Did it involve blaming someone else or the circumstances? We craft these kind of protective stories with ourselves, sometimes cast as the victim, other people or circumstances as the villain. We have the story elements right there. Has anyone, you think about your kids, Matt, when they've broken something or done something wrong.
They never do anything wrong.
I'm so thankful, you're so blessed. But have you or Bonnie ever sat down in your homeschool sessions and said, okay, I'm going to teach you how to tell a story that blames other people?
We actually haven't focused on that unit yet.
Oh, man. But, so all I'm saying is I think all of us know that just happens with us. We just do it. Especially if we're not aware and not thinking, we just automatically go, and we're all storytellers. So I submit for your consideration that, like your physical DNA, which is a mapping of all your physical characteristics, how tall you are, how short you are, that is literally passed down from generation to generation through the reproductive process. We also have an energetic DNA that we pass down from generation to generation, and the influence of story in our lives is part of that energetic DNA. Being aware of this is really, really powerful, because even though story in and of itself is neither good nor bad, it just is, the way we individually interact with story can be something super positive, or it can be negative in our lives. And I think that last idea is really important. The way we individually interact with story can be negative or positive. And it's probably, I don't want to dwell a lot on the negative, but it's just really easier to come up with stories real fast that are negative. And additionally, when we do that, we can get really clear about what we do and what we don't want to create in our lives. So we're going to go down just a little ways down that path. And I want you guys to go ahead and I want you to close your eyes again. I want you just to ground and to breathe. A couple deep breaths and blow them out. And then I want you to each come up with your own personal example. So close your eyes and think about the last time, or maybe a big time, maybe not the last time, that you felt threatened in any way, that you didn't achieve something that you wanted, that you got in an argument with someone or got upset with someone important to you, like maybe your spouse or one of your children. Think about one of those kind of experiences that created a lot of emotion. If you have one, just wave your hand. Okay? I'll give you a couple more minutes. Something that really triggered you. Something that you didn't achieve something, somebody got angry with you. Is there anyone still trying to come up with a memory? Okay, we'll go ahead and go on from there. Okay, with that memory, I would like you to think about the story you told. And you might not have verbally told that story to anyone else, but you could have told it to your family, to your friends, but maybe it was just to yourself. Think about the story that you told about that particular incident. Were there roles defined in your story? Was there a victim? Was there a villain? Was there a hero? Was there blame that was placed on someone or something? Were there excuses that were woven into this story? Was there rationalization there? Was there emotion in that story? How believable was your story? If you would have told someone else, would they have been drawn to you and drawn to the story? Did they buy it? Did they believe it? Did they feel something because of that story? Did you or someone else make decisions because of that story that you told? I'm never doing this again, or this person's really not a good person to hang out with, or anything along those lines. Because of that story that you told, did something change for you or others because of the decisions that you made? Were there impacts of those decisions beyond just your own storytelling? And how many times have you retold that story to yourself or to others? Okay, I'm gonna have you open your eyes. I think all of us have a story like that. We have specific triggers, and you know, sometimes Dan comes home late and I get triggered by that. And I go into this thing in my head, but really it's my problem, not his. But if I keep telling that story about how Dan always comes home late and blaming him for what I'm choosing, then it puts a rift between us. And it's my creating that does that. And so that's the power of story. It's neither good nor bad, but it's our interaction with it and what we do with it. And if we're aware that we're going into our storytelling mode, then we have a lot of ability and power to change what the outcome of that story is going to be. We can change the stories that we tell. We can change the results in our lives because of those stories. So I have one or two things that I'd love to challenge you to do. And they're kind of hard, but if you're up to it, I think it would be amazing. And that would be either, number one, set some kind of an alarm and do it for one day. Every waking hour, every 15 minutes, check in with yourself. Am I in story? Am I telling a story about an assignment my boss gave me that I didn't like, or about my coworker not showing up in the way that they should show up, or about my kids being irresponsible, or about, am I telling a story to myself or to other people? What purpose does it serve? Why am I telling that story? Am I trying to explain something? Am I trying to protect myself, warn myself of danger, which, you know, the values and traditions of society, sometimes stories were told to warn kids of danger, right? Jot yourself a little note about that. A less intense approach would be to set an alarm for an hour, every hour, for 3 days. And just look at how many times am I in story? And am I going there consciously, or am I going there unconsciously? And that exercise is just to make you aware of how often you go into story. The great thing of becoming aware of story, and about, you know, that kind of example, like I said above, as far as me getting triggered by Dad coming home in my stories, if I can convince myself that the negative is true, if I can, like the story you guys tied into, if I can put emotion in that and anchor that, and if I can cause other people to be drawn into that and believe that and buy my story about whoever's the villain and whoever's the victim and whoever's the hero, if I'm so powerful that I can do that in a negative way, I can do the exact same thing in a powerful way that's positive and create the opposite of that negative experience. I can create amazing things, and I can tell amazing stories that are positive, and I can pull people into those. I can use those stories to support people and encourage people, support myself and encourage myself. So as far as story, when I become aware of story, the influence in my life, because it's part of who I am, it's part of our culture. When I become aware, I become powerful. When I see my pattern, I have choice. When I get clear on what I want to create in my life, then I can write the script. When I'm consciously intentional in my choice of what I want to create, I'm powerful enough to write a positive story, to fill it with emotion that anchors it for me, just like the negative story anchors things, to tell it so well that others believe it and are drawn to it, and to tell it so many, many times that my positive story is what I see and what I experience every day. Because story is a living, breathing relationship, I can change it beginning now. We're all storytellers. It's a part of who we are. It's a part of our society. Being aware that story has the role that it has in our lives gives us the ability to be intentional in our creation of it, and in what we energetically pass down through our children and our grandchildren. So the question is, what kind of a story are you telling?
Awesome. Thank you, Sherri. Really appreciate that. And as you were speaking, you just brought up a story for me that my dad used to tell, and it's brief. And so if you don't mind, I'd like to share that right now. I think my girls like this one. There was, to start out, what were those words you said, those phrases?
Formulaic phrases.
Formulaic phrases. A long time ago, in a galaxy far, okay, not a galaxy. But in a land far away, there was a monastery that was on a lot of land. And there were some farmers who were exiles that came, well, settlers really, that came and started to settle the land, and the monks found out about it and said, this is our land. And they said, sorry, we didn't know it was just open land. We were just coming to settle. And they made an agreement, and they said, well, it's okay. We're not using that, and you can, farm it and prosper with it, and that's great. We're fine with that. Just as long as you understand it's ours, and that's fine. So that began, and it lasted generations. And after a few generations, it was passed down through story that the land was, the monks knew that the land was theirs. And at one point, the the settlers had grown so numerous that the monks were feeling concerned. And they discussed, and they said, you know what, it's time, we need to kick them off. We need to reclaim our land. And so they sent an embassy to them and said, you know, hey, this is our land, and we need you to pick up and go. The farmer's like, what? This is, we've been here for generations. This is our homes, our town. What are we supposed to do? And so there was some conflict there. And in an effort to try to resolve it, the monks wanted to help the settlers feel that they were just in driving them off, essentially. And so they said, well, how about we give you a chance to stay? Well, we'll have a little competition. And they said, sure, because it was, I mean, what else were going to do at that point? So they said, we challenge you to a silent debate. And they said, you pick your best debater, we'll pick ours, and we'll have a silent debate, and we'll have a judge from ours, and you can pick a judge from you, and we'll go like that. And they said, okay, sure, sounds good. And so they picked their best silent debater, the monks did, and they, you know, it was not really a question of who was going to win to them. They knew, and it's just a formality. And the farmers, you know, they drew straws, and whoever got the straw went, and so they came, and they set it up, and it proceeded like this. The monk began, the farmer, the monk, the farmer, and then the monk pulled out an apple, and the farmer pulled out a sandwich and a water and some juice. And the monk threw up his arms in exclamation and said, fine, you can stay, and marched off. And the farmer looked and bewildered and picked up his lunch and walked away. And then, so after this, the monks come, you know, the monk goes back, and the monks are like, what do you mean you lost? How can this be? What happened? And the monk says, well, I said there is one God. And he said, but there are 3 personages. And I said, God is here. And he said, God is all around. And then I pulled out the apple, the sign of the fall. And he pulled out the tokens of the sacrifice. And I was just appalled that this man could do. I had no idea he would be able to counter those. And so they were, you know, just at a loss amongst the monks. And the farmer walked back to his town and they said, hey, what happened? And the farmer says, I have no idea. He says, well, tell us. He said, you have to leave in 1 day. I said, we'll need at least 3. And he said, you have to leave now. I said, but where will we go? And then he pulled out his lunch, so I pulled out mine. That little story is so illustrative of perception, is it not? Our perception that we assign to things, and we can see the same communication in such vastly different ways. Going into another kind of a story, more of one if you can imagine yourself. Imagine for a moment you take up a new job as a waiter or waitress in a restaurant, and you're excited about it. And you start your first day, and you're getting trained. You have your supervisor is like working with you. You're following him, you know, shadowing the first day, and you know, you actually wait one table and getting the hang of it and doing a good job. And next day you come in again and you start waiting. You know, you wait a couple different tables one at a time, and you're starting to get the feel for it, and you're liking it. You're excited. You're getting some tips, and it's a good experience. Wednesday comes. You walk in, and you can tell immediately that something's up. Your supervisor is like, you could tell he's just downfallen, crestfallen. It's like something's amiss. And so you walk up, and you try to be cheerful, you know, like you're here for work, and say, hey, what's going on? And he's like, oh, hey. Like, what's up? Like, oh, it's Wednesday. Sorry you have to work Wednesday. Why? Well, what does that have to do? It's like, oh, you're a greenie, you don't know. Wednesdays stink for tips. I don't know what it is. They just stink. No one tips well on Wednesdays for whatever reason. Now, at that moment, are you a choice? So very much a choice. You can choose into his story, right? This is the story the supervisor is telling you. You can choose into that. You can take on that belief. And if you do, how will you show up to work that day? How will you wait on tables?
Miserably.
Miserably? Yeah, you're probably not going to be showing up like, how can I serve you? You're going to give me the worst step ever. I'm going to be a pet. No. You're like, most likely you're going to show up and be like, hey, you got everything? Okay, good. You're not going to put in that effort. You're not going to have that twinkle, that go, that energy that people just, you've been waited upon by a waiter or a waitress that's just like, man, they're meant to do this. This is awesome. They're great. You wouldn't show up like that. But what if in that moment you took on a different story? What if you said to yourself, you know what? I am going to earn more tips on Wednesdays than he does on any other day of the week. I'm going to prove this so wrong. Just wait. Watch out. Here I come. How are you going to show up? How are you going to show up waiting tables?
Much happier.
But different? Yeah, much happier. You're going to be on the ball. You're going to have the twinkle. You're going to be interested in the people. You're going to be making that conversation. You're going to be serving them promptly. You're going to be so all over it, right? And why? Simply because you chose into a different story, a different belief. The beliefs we choose make a difference about what is true for us, what we create. Because is it true that people tip less on Wednesdays?
Maybe.
Oh, maybe. I don't know what the stats are. There might be some weird statistical thing. But will it be true for him if he shows up that way? No. Not a bit. Not a bit. So it's amazing to me that there is the truth that I would put with a lowercase t that we can create. There's absolute truth, capital T, absolute truth in the world. I believe that very much. But there is also truth that is the self-fulfilling prophecy based on the stories and beliefs we tell ourselves. And I am here to tell you from my own experience, as I've been awakened to some of these stories that I like to tell myself, or have liked to, I will say I liked to tell myself.
Past tense.
Yes, I still do. When I discover them, I try to make them past tense. I make them past tense. And the impact that those changes has had on my life, especially and above all in my marriage. My connection with Bonnie, I mean, we've always had a good marriage. We've been blessed that way. I'm very grateful for it. But the impact in the last 6 to 8 months, as we've been engaged in some deep mentorship, where we've been diving in, looking, what are the beliefs you're telling yourself? What are the stories you're buying into? What's happening? Our connection has been unreal. I did not know that we could feel as connected as we have. And I love it. I absolutely love it. Every morning, right now, we're practicing this. We just decided to start. Every morning, we ask each other, how can I show up for you today? How can I show you today that I love you? And at the end of the day, we say, how did I do? It's rather surprising sometimes. And sometimes I say, how did I do? I know I did bad. That's happened. And she has shown up and said, you know what? I can choose to feel loved and be happy no matter how you showed up. I can show up that way. I can choose to tell myself the story that you don't have to show up to be my hero to make me happy. I am in charge of that. That is such an inspiration to me to show up. For me. And that connection we built has been fantastic. So where do we get this from? Just share what I'm talking about. This mentorship, this learning that we're going through as a couple and such, has come from a group called Limitless. Limitless is a 3-day event, or begins with a 3-day event, you could say, that is just absolutely outstanding. In this 3-day event, sorry, I'm going to pause just for a second. Children, Amy and Eliza, go to the room. You're making too much noise, please. Thank you, sweeties. This 3-day event is one where if you come, you will experience so many opportunities to see the stories you're in. I will not promise you an easy 3 days, but I will promise you an incredibly meaningful 3 days. An incredibly meaningful 3 days. And these 3 days are this week. For January, it's this week. It's Thursday, Friday, and Saturday. My wife and I love this so much, we volunteer staff this event. And there are already over 700 people registered for this event this weekend. There are still some spaces open, and we have the privilege this time, we were given a Christmas gift of the opportunity to give some free tickets away to this event. If Sherri invited you, Sherri, you have some tickets, I assume, still to share? We still have some tickets to share to this event. If Sherri invited you, please reach out to her and ask her for a free ticket. It will make an impact on your life. I feel confident in saying that because I've lived it. And it's just been fantastic. The benefits you'll enjoy, the stories that I've heard people tell, the stories that they've told, and the new stories that they choose to tell. People, there was a girl that said, "This is it. It's, I'm going to this seminar and this is it. If this doesn't do something, I'm done with life. I'm checking out." And she went. And she told a different story when she was done. She chose it in to life. She chose into rewriting her story. She chose out of abusing herself with the story she was telling herself. That is some of the impact that this can have. So please reach out to us. It's this weekend, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. It's free this time. I would be surprised to see this again, to have free tickets. Normally it's a $500 ticket, generally. So take advantage of it, come. And with that, there's one last thing that we get to do. So Sherri, I'm gonna have you come on up. And I gotta go grab something for you real quick. Bonnie's not here, she's my helper usually on this. All right. Bonnie is actually in some training for the Limitless right now for this weekend. So, Ben and Jerry's, as I mentioned at the beginning. You know how there's technology, when a new technology comes out, they like to, like a new phone or something, they do an unboxing kind of thing. That's what we like to do here. And Sherri selected Caramel Sutra. And Caramel Sutra is a beautiful ice cream. It's chocolate ice cream with chocolate chunks and caramel ice cream with a sweet caramel core right down the middle of it. And it is
And that's
yummy.
me, sweet caramel core.
Awesome. So that is for you, and thank you so much for coming.
Thank you so much, Matt. Had fun.
All right. Let's go get some ice cream. And if you're online, come live in a couple weeks and come get.
This is yummy.
Yep.
Yummy.
Come get some free ice cream.
Thank you.